They called me a disgrace. Not just behind closed doors, not in whispers. They said it at the dinner table at fundraisers, even in front of the housekeeper. "She's not like the rest of us," my father would laugh, scotch in hand. My mother never corrected him. She just nodded, that soft, cold smile stretched across her face. As if I weren't standing right there. "I'm Madeline Kerrigan. I'm 33 years old. And today, I became the youngest general in active service the United States has ever commissioned." The Capitol dome gleams above me. Flashbulbs explode like small bursts of lightning as I raise my right hand and repeat the oath, my voice steady beneath the weight of 4 stars. Somewhere not far from here, my parents are watching this moment. Not from a front row seat, not even from the crowd. From a living room sofa, perhaps, or a boardroom screen. Wherever they are, they know now. They know the name they tried to erase is etched into military history. I don't smile for the cameras. I don't look for them in the crowd. I only fix my eyes on the flag because that's who I serve now. Not blood, not legacy, not their definition of pride. When the Secretary of Defense steps back and says, "Congratulations, General Kerrigan," the applause rises like thunder behind me. And for the first time in my life, they can't talk over it. They can only listen. I was 13 the first time I heard the word disgrace attached to my name. Not whispered, not implied, spoken clearly like a diagnosis. My mother had found the hand-drawn battle map I'd been working on for weeks. It was tucked inside a history book I never actually read. I had used her dress patterns to model troop formations. She stood in the doorway of my room, fingers trembling with fury, and said, "Madeline, this is what freaks do. You want people thinking you're one of those." I didn't know what those meant. But I understood enough to hide things better after that. By 17, I'd mastered the art of silence. I dressed the way they expected. I smiled politely at my father's colleagues, nodded along when my sister Natalie was praised for her internships and charity galas. But I never really spoke, not about the things that mattered. Because whenever I did, whenever I brought up tactical theory, international defense policies, or my dream of attending West Point, I watched my father's jaw tighten like a trap being set. I knew that look. It meant I was veering off script again. The night I got my acceptance letter from West Point, I didn't tell anyone. I packed in silence, waiting until the house was empty. Mother at a fundraiser, father golfing with clients, Natalie rehearsing for some debutante banquet. I left a note, not out of guilt, but because part of me still believed someone might care enough to read it. They did more than read it. They rewrote it. By the time I boarded the bus that would take me to basic, my name had already vanished from the family's website, the Christmas newsletter, even the wall of photos in the downstairs hallway. They told extended relatives I'd chosen a different path, that I was dealing with some mental instability. Natalie told a mutual friend I'd run away to join a militia. None of it surprised me. What did surprise me was how quiet it felt. Not just around me, but inside me. Like someone had turned off the static that had always buzzed in my chest. The tension of performing, of pretending. The ache of being almost enough. I arrived at the gates of West Point, with a duffel bag, a scholarship, and no one to wave goodbye. Most cadets had families clapping from the barricades, teary-eyed parents, siblings with phones raised high to record the moment. I walked in alone. I didn't cry. That night, I sat on the edge of a narrow bunk and watched another girl tape a photo of her family above her bed. I had nothing to tape, just the rejection letter from a college I'd never wanted, and the half-burned edges of the note I wrote to say goodbye. I folded both and tucked them into my locker beneath the lining of my uniform cap. They'd taken my name, my story, even my voice for a while, but they hadn't taken my mind. And that, I decided, would be enough for now. I dropped my last name the week I turned 18. Not legally, just quietly. On every form, every badge, every new beginning, I wrote Madeline Kerrigan. Kerrigan was my mother's maiden name, long buried beneath the Whitmore crest, and its suffocating expectations. I reclaimed it like a weapon, one syllable at a time. At West Point, no one asked why I never had visitors on family weekend. No one questioned why my emergency contact was blank. People assumed I was just focused, reserved, intense. And they weren't wrong. I woke at 4:45, ran further, lifted heavier, and studied harder than anyone else in my unit. Not because I had something to prove, at least not to them, but because I had nothing to fall back on. By the time I graduated, I was top 5 in my class and already on the radar of Joint Special Operations Command. I chose signal intelligence. I liked the quiet brilliance of it, the precision, the way you could break open a system without ever firing a bullet just by listening harder than anyone else dared to. Then came the deployments. Afghanistan, South Sudan, a classified mission in Estonia. I still can't talk about, not even in passing. I wore different uniforms, spoke different call signs, but inside, I was always the girl who had to rebuild herself from silence. There was one person who saw it, General Robert Halbrook. He was blunt grizzled and walked with a limp that matched the steel in his voice. I briefed him once during a field simulation when I was 26. Everyone else referred to me as the tech mind. He called me the ghost tactician. You don't just follow maps, he said. You rewrite them while people sleep. After that, he kept pulling me into projects, some joint intelligence, some strategic simulations. Some I didn't realize were tests until much later. He never asked about my family, but I think he knew. Men like him, career soldiers who'd seen what rejection can mold. They could spot the fracture lines beneath a polished salute. Between deployments, I finished a master's in strategic defense systems. Nights were for reading white papers, building new encryptions, dismantling old truths. I remember once during a hurricane lockdown in Guam, I spent 4 days reworking the entire comms failover for a SEAL recon team, alone. No one asked me to. I just couldn't sleep until the logic made sense. Back in the States, people started using my name in full briefings. Captain Kerrigan suggested. Major Kerrigan designed. Still, I kept my head down. I never stepped in front of the mic, never asked for credit. I was the mind in the room no one noticed until the numbers proved I'd been right all along. And all through it, the Whitmores stayed silent. Not a letter, not a call, just the occasional whisper I'd catch from someone who'd been at a fundraiser. Didn't her family disown her? Wasn't she institutionalized? Sometimes I let them believe it, because obscurity gave me space. And in that space, I built things they couldn't imagine. What they called disgrace, I called freedom. I wasn't supposed to see it. The live stream wasn't advertised publicly. It was a shareholders' town hall, invite-only password, protected, hosted by Whitmore Kensington Holdings. But someone from my old high school sent me the link. No message. Just the URL and a subject line that said, "You should know." I almost didn't click. When the feed loaded, my parents were already seated on stage, mother in an ivory blazer, father in a navy suit that matched his ego. Natalie sat between them, perfect as ever, flipping through a leather folio, as if this were just another brunch with hedge fund friends. Then the moderator asked about the missing daughter. The air shifted. My father adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, and said, "We prefer not to discuss that part of our history publicly. It's a chapter best left closed." The moderator pushed. There's been speculation that she served in the military. Some reports mentioned. My mother cut in with a smile that could slice glass. Madeline has struggled with stability, emotional unpredictability. We did everything we could, but at some point, you have to protect the rest of the family. Natalie chimed in, almost bored. She disappeared. That's the truth. It wasn't our choice. I stared at the screen. My breath didn't come. It just paused. Not because I hadn't heard worse. I had. But something about watching them say it so calmly, publicly, surgically, like I was a rumor they were finally brave enough to kill. That was new. I closed the laptop without rage. Just precision. That night, I pulled out a file I hadn't touched in years. Applications, personnel endorsements, service records. At the top was a position no one my age had ever held. Not in recent history. A Joint Strategic Command role slated for veterans with 20 years service minimum. I had 13, but I also had Halbrook. 2 days later, I walked into his office. He didn't ask why I was there. He just looked up, leaned back in his chair, and said, "It's time, isn't it?" I nodded. He reached for the red folder on the shelf behind him. "They'll fight it. Say you're too young, too fast, too invisible." "Let them," I said. He grinned. "That's my girl." The application process was brutal. Simulations, psych evals, peer reviews, a classified hearing. At one point, I sat across from 5 Pentagon brass and fielded questions about global strategy like I was defusing a bomb. Maybe I was. 8 months later, I got the call. The president was nominating me for brigadier general. the youngest in active service. The first woman in decades to be promoted directly from Special Operations Strategy without a conventional command post. They asked if I wanted to keep it low profile. I said no. If the world was going to say my name, I wanted them to say it loud. I wanted my parents to hear it, not in a headline, but in a silence that followed a silence so deep it would rattle the fine china in their display cabinets. Let them hear it through glass. The morning of the ceremony, D.C. was unusually still. Even the air seemed to pause, as if the city knew something was about to shift. I stood behind the black curtain on the north platform of the National Mall, my dress blue's flawless silver buttons catching first light. On my chest, no medals, just the insignia of 4 stars stitched in exacting symmetry. Crowds filled the mall shoulder to shoulder. Reporters jostled for position. Drones hovered overhead. Flags lined the perimeter like silent sentinels. To most of the country, I was still a name on a classified list. The appointment had been leaked youngest general in active duty history, but no one had published a photo. They didn't know who they were waiting for. I did. Behind the podium, the Secretary of Defense stepped forward, flanked by 2 aides. His voice carried clean and direct. Today, we witness a turning point, a new chapter in leadership strategy and service. It is my honor to present a soldier whose brilliance has rewritten protocols, saved countless lives, and redefined what it means to command from the shadows. Ladies and gentlemen, General Madeline Kerrigan. My boots hit the platform like measured thunder. I walked out to a sea of flashbulbs and held my posture, not stiff, not cold, just solid. A single unit. Somewhere in a luxury home far away, my parents were watching. I could almost feel it, the way their breath must have caught when the name rang out. The same name they'd erased from photo albums and newsletters, now echoing across the Capitol in full broadcast clarity. I didn't look for them in the crowd, but the cameras found me. My face calm, unreadable, lit up on every screen in the nation. I could already imagine my mother's hand frozen mid-sip, my father's collar twitching, like it always did when he lost control of a room. This time there was no room left to own. The secretary extended the insignia plaque. I accepted it with my left hand, saluted with my right. Behind me, the Joint Chiefs stood in formation. In front of me, the audience rose. I didn't smile. I didn't blink. I simply stood tall and let the weight of the moment settle. When the oath began, I spoke each word with precision, not just because I meant it, but because every syllable was a reclamation. I do solemnly swear. I wasn't swearing for them. Not for the ones who left me out of every holiday, who weaponized silence, who treated my ambition like a pathology. I was swearing for every kid who'd ever been called a disgrace for dreaming too big, too differently, too loud. The final words fell into the air like stone. So help me God. Applause thundered across the platform, but I didn't flinch. I held my salute until protocol allowed, then lowered it slowly, purposefully. As I turned toward the flag, I let my eyes trace the red and white, like a map I'd memorized a lifetime ago. For a brief second, I let the applause recede in my ears, replaced by something deeper, older, the silence of that bus ride at 17, when I'd left home with no one waving goodbye. Now the whole country was standing, and somewhere behind a screen, the people who once said I didn't belong couldn't look away. They could only listen. I found it again the night after the ceremony creased at the corners, yellowed slightly at the edges. The letter I wrote when I was 19 never sent. It was tucked inside a pocket of my old duffel bag, the one I hadn't touched since my last field tour. I unfolded it slowly, letting the silence of my quarters at Fort Myer wrap around me like armor that had grown soft with memory. Dear Mom, Dad, Natalie, I don't need your applause. I don't even need your forgiveness. But I want you to know I made it. I survived. Without you. I remembered the version of me who had written that. Young but already tired, trying to sound braver than she felt. I'd never sent it because I knew deep down that it wouldn't be read. Or worse, it would be read and laughed at. A message pinged on my secure line. Unknown sender. Subject. Was it really you? I opened it with slow caution. The email was from Natalie. I watched the whole thing. It said, "You looked different, stronger. I didn't recognize you at first. I don't know what to say. Or if I even should say anything." I stared at the screen for a long time. My fingers hovered over the keys. But I didn't respond. Not because I hated her. I didn't. What I felt was quieter than hate, an ache that had already faded into muscle memory. They'd built an entire identity around my absence. To reply now would be like reapplying for a name they'd already rejected. Instead, I slid the old letter into a folder and sealed it. Then I walked it downstairs to the archive safe filed under personal restricted. I labeled it not forgotten. In the same drawer was a gift General Halbrook had given me the day my promotion was approved, a challenge coin engraved with the motto, "Respect isn't given. It's survived." He said I'd understand the phrase more with time. I already did. Sometimes surviving is the only answer. Weeks passed. News articles ran profiles. Headlines called me a symbol of resilience and a force of strategy. I didn't grant interviews. I didn't speak on television. I let the image speak for itself, a quiet girl with no cheerleaders, now standing where no one thought she'd belong. Late one night, I pulled out a photo. It was me, age 10, standing in a junior ROTC uniform, 2 sizes too big, saluting a paper flag I'd taped to the garage wall. Natalie had taken the picture. She'd rolled her eyes while doing it, muttering something about weird hobbies. I kept it anyway. Looking at it now, I didn't feel sad. I felt whole. Like the full loop had finally been walked, not closed. The past didn't own me anymore. And the future? It was mine to write, with no one else's permission. She came without warning. It was a cold afternoon, the kind that made concrete echo under boots. I had just dismissed a cadet mentorship session when my assistant stepped in uncertain. "Ma'am, civilian visitor. Says her name is Natalie Whitmore." My hand stilled above the clipboard. I hadn't spoken her name aloud in years. She was waiting at the front corridor. No heels, no makeup, just a navy coat that swallowed her frame. Her eyes met mine, but neither of us moved. "I'm not here for an apology," she said, or to offer one. I just wanted to see. I studied her face for a moment, older now, but not harder. Something inside her had cracked, but not shattered. I nodded once. "Follow me." I showed her the main wing, the mentorship hall, the strategy labs. She didn't ask questions at first, just looked. At the faces of the students. At the leadership quotes lining the wall. At the simplicity of the space. No medals, no portraits, just purpose. She paused longest at the Youth Initiative board, 12 photos of girls in uniform ages 12 to 18. One of them, a wiry girl with braces and fire in her eyes, stood mid-salute. "She looks like you," Natalie murmured. "She's better than I was," I said. Outside in the quiet garden behind the complex, she pulled an envelope from her coat. I wrote something she said, offering it. "It's not an explanation, just words. You don't have to open it." I took it, held it, unopened. "I help now," she added. "Volunteer program. I coach public speaking for girls in foster care. Just thought, maybe I can help someone find their voice before they're 33. I gave her nothing. Just silence. She nodded. "I get it." As she turned to go, she looked back once more. "I won't ask to come back. I just needed to know the person they erased is still standing." I didn't respond, but I didn't stop her either, and somehow that felt like enough. The sky was still dark when I laced my boots. By the time I stepped onto the gravel path behind the base, the cadets were already forming up silhouettes, moving through morning fog, like shadows chasing purpose. I watched them from a distance, some young, some hardened by life already, but all of them carrying something heavier than just packs. One of them, a girl barely 16, jogged past and nodded. She didn't know who I used to be, only who I am now. Inside the mentorship hall, a small framed photo sat on my desk, me at 10 years old, in a borrowed ROTC uniform, 2 sizes too big, saluting a paper flag taped to our garage. I used to think that girl was lost. Now I understand she was just waiting for the noise to quiet down. Across the room, a wall bore 12 names, graduates of our youth initiative, now in service academies across the country. Each one of them had once been told they weren't enough, that they were too much or too quiet or not the right kind of strong. I made sure they'd never hear those words here. In the far corner, an envelope still sat unopened. Natalie's. I hadn't touched it since the day she handed it to me. Not out of anger, just choice. Some bridges don't need to be crossed again. Some just need to stay intact from a distance. Outside, the flag rose with first light. I stepped out, saluted, once quiet private. They used to call me a disgrace. Now they don't call me at all. And for the first time in my life, I don't need them to, because I am not the silence they gave me. I am the sound that came after.